Did you know that in the heart of Southeast Asia, there exists a city so peculiar that it's almost unbelievable? Picture this: vast 20-lane highways completely devoid of traffic, colossal temples standing deserted with not a soul in sight. What's even more astonishing is that this city is 4 times the size of London and 6 times the size of New York, yet it appears to be uninhabited. Now, we're embarking on a deep exploration of the city of Naypyidaw. Get ready for an extraordinary journey, because the more you learn about this city, the more bizarre the story becomes. Myanmar. Napier is the capital city of Myanmar. Myanmar is a country in Southeast Asia with 50 million people. If you were around before 1989, you might know this country by a different name, which is Burma. This name change from Burma to Myanmar is quite controversial. It happened because of a military dictatorship that took control in the 1960s. Many people didn't think this regime had the right to change the country's name. However, the United Nations uses the name Myanmar, so that's what we're going with. Now, let's talk about the strangest capital in the world. Naypyidaw is the weirdest capital city on Earth. Let's take a look at a satellite image of the city. It covers an area of about 7,000 square kilometers, which is way bigger than cities like London or New York. Shanghai is another big city, but it's still smaller than Napier. Here's the major difference. Shanghai has 26 million people living in it, while Napier has less than 1 million. This makes Napier feel like a ghost town, like something you'd see in a post-apocalyptic movie. The roads in Napier are incredibly wide, some having up to 20 lanes, but they're totally empty of cars. Occasionally, a truck might pass through, and it'll have the whole road to itself. The parks, gardens, malls, golf course, zoo, and even the famous Upadasanti Pagoda are all deserted. Napier has an airport that can handle millions of passengers, but on a busy day, you'll rarely see more than a couple of hundred people there. There are also many fancy luxury hotels, but their swimming pools are empty, and most of the rooms have never been used. In fact, the only people you'll find in the city are gardeners and street cleaners. Now here's the big difference between Napier and a post-apocalyptic city. Napier is kept in perfect condition by a large workforce. There are people in the shops too. Back in 2015, 2 journalists from The Guardian visited the city and found a jewelry store with dozens of employees, but no customers. It was completely silent. The population has increased a bit since 2015, but it's still pretty eerie to think about. Inside Naypyidaw, and this capital city gets even more bizarre. There's one place where you might actually see some people: Myanmar's parliament. It's a large complex with grand, identical-looking buildings surrounded by fences and moats. Getting close to it is tough because there are soldiers guarding it. But who are they really guarding when there's no one else around? There are rumors that these high-security buildings have underground tunnels that stretch beneath the city, supposedly designed with the help of North Korean technicians. While these rumors are hard to prove, given how strange Napier is, it wouldn't be a shocker. Besides the ministry zone, the city also has military, hotel, residential zones, and more. In the residential zone, the roofs of buildings have different colors based on the jobs of the people who live there. Blue roofs are for Ministry of Health workers, green roofs for Ministry of Agriculture workers, but most of these homes are empty. The city zones seem big, clumsy, and chaotic, without any logical order. It's as if they put these different parts of the city together without much thought. Finding a city center in Napier is impossible. It's like wandering through a confusing maze. The road layout doesn't help either. They are oddly arranged and hard to navigate. Take this 20-lane highway inside the ministry zone, randomly connecting to a much smaller road. If it were full of traffic, it would quickly turn into a mess. And the roundabouts, they are huge and strange, unlike any you'll find anywhere else. This one in particular sits in the middle of a 16-lane highway, and for some reason, they built another road to avoid it, only to intersect with the highway at a 90-degree angle. Not a great idea. Further east, there's another massive 16-lane highway that runs almost straight for miles. It looks a bit like an airplane runway, and interestingly, it's located between a military base and the military zone. Some of these roads are quite dangerous, like the stretch known as Death Highway to the south of Napier. It's had fatal accidents since it opened in 2010. On the side of Death Highway, there's a sign written in English for some reason. Is it a warning or a dark joke? For some drivers, this sign is the last thing they see before an accident. There are more odd details in Napier, like the impressive Upadasanti Pagoda, which is just a copy of a building in the old capital Yangon. Although it's meant to be a Buddhist monument, no monks were allowed near it during its official opening, only politicians and military leaders. Everywhere you look in Myanmar's capital, something doesn't quite add up. All of this leaves us wondering, why was Naypyidaw built? Naypyidaw was built many years ago by a controversial military dictatorship. When we say controversial, we're being nice. This regime was harsh and very unpopular. In the 1960s, they took over through a military coup. Some students protested at Yangon University, and the regime responded by sending soldiers. We don't know exactly how many, but hundreds of students were shot. They didn't want to have elections, at least not until 1990. Even when they did, it didn't mean much. The military only won 10 out of 492 seats, but they canceled the election and arrested opposition politicians. This regime was brutal and violent, and they're the ones who decided to build Napier. No one knows for sure when they started building it, but satellite images suggest it began around 2002. The city was revealed 3 years later with the name Naypyidaw, which roughly means home of kings. Clearly, these military leaders thought highly of themselves. Building the city cost $4 billion. That might sound like a lot, and it is, especially for a country with a GDP of less than $10 billion at the time. There were many better ways to spend that money, like helping the impoverished parts of Myanmar with schooling and healthcare. But the military regime didn't really care. So it's even worse that the city is now a strange, empty megacity. It wasn't just a lot of money, it was a waste of a lot of money. At least that's how it looks when you see these pictures. But what if the government wanted? The Dark Master Plan. Naypyidaw is like a mysterious, empty megacity. But if you thought this story was strange before, it's about to get even stranger. Before Naypyidaw, Myanmar's capital was a coastal city called Yangon. It was home to over 7 million people and had been the national capital since Myanmar was part of the British Empire way back in 1852. But more than 150 years later, Myanmar's dictatorship decided Yangon was no longer suitable. They said it was overcrowded and the population had outgrown the city's infrastructure. They wanted to start fresh in a new city with more space and better urban planning. But many experts think there's more to the story. They believe the real reason the military built Naypyidaw is much stranger. They say the regime was worried about Yangon's growing population. If a big protest or rebellion happened there, it would be hard to control so many people at once. There had already been student protests at Yangon University, and it felt like a matter of time before something bigger erupted. Supposedly, they were also concerned about a possible naval attack from the United States from the Bay of Bengal. This attack was unlikely but not impossible. The U.S. government didn't like the regime and still called the country Burma in official documents, not accepting the new name Myanmar. They had intervened in Southeast Asia before, like in Vietnam, so the military regime decided to move the capital to an inland area. Here it would be less vulnerable to protests and harder for the U.S. to attack. They placed the city between two mountain ranges, forming natural defenses. They built a highly guarded government complex with fences, soldiers, and maybe even secret underground tunnels. And perhaps they left the rest of the city relatively empty on purpose. With no one around, there was less risk of a popular uprising threatening the regime's power. Even if more people moved in over time, the wide roads would make it easy for the military to control any protests. Some people even think the 20-lane highways could be secret military runways, allowing planes to land in different parts of the city to respond to protests quickly. These are just theories, and none of them have been confirmed by Myanmar's military dictatorship. Maybe the official explanation is true, and they moved the capital just to avoid traffic and overcrowding in Yangon. But a city as strange as this one probably doesn't have such a simple explanation, right? Naypyidaw today. In 2015, the government agreed to have another democratic election. Even though they lost again, they accepted the election results for some time. Myanmar's situation seemed to be getting better. But in 2021, the military did another coup, taking control and causing chaos in the country. A civil war has been going on ever since, with battles between both sides. But the main focus of this conflict is in the city of Yangon, which is the most populated part of the country. That's where people are protesting, and that's where the battles are happening. Meanwhile, right in the center of the country, Naypyidaw is empty and calm. The military leaders are safe, away from all the action. Is this just a coincidence, or is it like a fortress? We don't know for sure. Let us know your thoughts on why this city was built in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.